So continuing the battle with 4.1, here is kind of a summary of what we were talking about as far as a period is concerned. This is taken off the middle page of 137. Alright, so the graph y equals the sine of bx will resemble that of y equals the sine of x. It will look similar to it. The problem is the period. How fast it goes through its period will be different. The period of this is 2 pi over b. The period of this is also 2 pi over b. It's just that the period, there's a 1 there, so when we put a 1 in here for b, we just get 2 pi. So in the standard form, we just get 2 pi for the period. But when we do have a number in front of the x, it goes down here, and that will tell us the period. This exact same thing with cosine. It has the same 2 pi over b period. So I'm not even going to go into all of that. But let's look at example 3, get into some actual problems here instead of all the theory, and see if we can make this look like it's going to work. So we have y equals the cosine of 2/3 x. And they want us to graph that over one period. Okay, so let's see what we can find here. The period for this is going to be 2 pi over b, which in this case is 2 pi over 2/3. So we're going to invert that, so it becomes 2 pi times 3 over 2, which equals 6 pi over 2, which equals 3 pi. So that ends up being our period. So let's go ahead and write that up here. Period is equal to 3 pi. And then I can get rid of this work that I did below it. So again, we're going to divide this up into 4 intervals, because remember, when we've got our graph, we're interested in our high point, our crossover point, our low point, and our crossover point. So we're interested in breaking this up into 4 intervals, 4 quarters. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Because something happens at the end of each of these. Here we're at our high point, here we cross x, here we're at our low point, here we cross x again. So we start here. So something happens at each of these places, and if we can put a point there, 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 and there, we can very easily draw our graph here without having to find like any of these other points here. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to divide each one of these graphs that we're going to do now into 4 different intervals. And that's what we're going to be doing for example 3 here. So at this point we know our period is 3 pi. We start at 0 and we go to 3 pi. So our interval is 0 to 3 pi. So our beginning place is 0, our ending point is 3 pi. Alright, so let's go ahead and find those points. So to get those points, we do what I had mentioned earlier, 1/4 times the sum of the interval, 1/2 times the sum of the interval, and 3/4 times the sum of the interval. So this is going to be 3 pi times 1/4, so this is going to be 3 pi over 4. This is going to be 3 pi over 2, and this is going to be 9 pi over 4. So I have all of the points that I'm interested in here. So let's go ahead and put those on here. So I've got 3 pi, my 1/4 interval, okay, this is my halfway point, is 3 pi over 2. My 3/4 point was 9 pi over 4, and my 1/4 point was 3 pi over 4. So I know things are going to happen at these places. But what I don't necessarily know is what my y values are based on my x values. So I'm going to have to plug some things in. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug 0, 3 pi over 4, 3 pi over 2, and this is always what we're going to do here is we're just going to put in our quarters here, and 3 pi. So in this case we're going to be working with 5 different numbers, and this will be pretty much the way it works. Alright, so see if I can get enough room here. Move this out of the way for right now. Move this up. Okay, and then I'm going to do 2/3 x, and then I'm going to find the cosine of 2/3 x. Alright, so what I'm doing here with this graph is I am trying to find out the y value. The y equals the cosine of 2/3 x. So this here, this row down here, are going to be my y values. So my x values that I'm going to put in here, well actually let me do this. Okay, I had too many rows there. I brought the x up. So what I'm looking at is when my x is 0, 3 pi over 4, this, and this. What is my cosine of 2/3 x going to be? Because that is going to equal my y value. So what I'm going to end up graphing is x, and this will correspond with my y value, which is down here. So I could actually put y here just so I know what I'm looking for there. So first step I'm going to do, I'm going to find out what 2/3 x is. So in order to do that, I take my x times 2/3, and I get a 0. I take my x, which is this, times 2/3, and I get pi over 2. Then I take this times 2/3, and I get pi. And then I take this times 2/3, and I get 3 pi over 2. And then I take this times 2/3 and get 2 pi. I did not do the math. Let's just take one of them. Let's take this one and take 2/3 times x, which is 9 pi over 4. That crosses a 3, that goes away, that goes to a 2, that goes to a 1, and I get 3 pi over 2. And that's what I've got right there. Alright, so that's how you find them. Now, in order to find my y value, I plug each of these in and take the cosine of it. So I take the cosine of 0, and I get 1. I take the cosine of pi over 2, and I get 0. I take the cosine of pi, and I get -1. Cosine of 3 pi over 2, I get 0. Cosine of 2 pi, and I get 1. If you do not get those answers, you're probably not in radians. So when x is 0, y is 1. Here's my x, y, x, y, x, y, x, y. So let's bring my graph back down here and go ahead and graph this. Put these in the right place. Alright, so when x is 0, y is 1. Let me get black on here for there. So that's 1, -1. Alright, so let's go back to yellow. So when x is 0, y is 1. When x is 3 pi over 4, y is 0. Because I'm taking it from here. I'm just looking at whatever my x value is and plugging my y value in. So when x is 3 pi over 2, y is -1. When it's 9 pi over 4, it's 0. And when it's 3 pi, it's 1. So there ends up being my cosine wave. It takes 3 pi before it repeats itself. Its high and low points are 1 and -1. And the quarters are here, 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 and here. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different intervals there. So that's how you do those, and we're going to get into some trickier ones here in a minute, but that gives us a good start on how to get moving on these.